Hi everybody, welcome to Amy Nolte Music. Today I'd like to talk about probably my favorite movie, Mary Poppins, and the song that came from it, Feed the Birds, written by Richard and Robert Sherman. I'm going to let them tell you about the song.
Walt used to call me in on a Friday afternoon with my brother Bob, and he'd sit down over here, he'd say, play it, and I would play Feed the Birds. He loved that song. It was his mantra. I think he was feeding the birds all his life. He was giving love. It doesn't take much to give love. That's what it's all about. So for Walt, I'm getting crowded. For Walt, I'm going to sing this one.
If you don't know the story of Mary Poppins, it's the story of a family in England around the turn of the 20th century. Mr. Banks, Mrs. Banks, and their children, Jane and Michael. We also get to know some of their neighbors, their kitchen help, as well as a friend named Bert who makes money doing all sorts of trades that bring him happiness. Jane and Michael exasperate their nanny by losing a kite in the park, and a search for a new nanny ensues.
You must be kind, you must be witty.
The act of George tearing up the nanny advertisement was cruel. George was dismissing his children, their desire to be helpful, and their desire to find somebody who would really nurture them and take care of them. And this sets the whole plot in motion. Mary Poppins comes into their lives, bringing just the right balance of order, utter silliness, imagination, and subtle knowledge. This scene, by the way, is the first time we hear the song. There are little trademarks that I think are beautiful throughout this movie. People taking Bert for granted, Mrs. Banks asking Bert to look after the children and sweep their chimneys, even though he has other obligations. And it's not just Bert who gets treated like this. There's also the town constable.
And I'm sure that if you go to the kitchen, cook will find you a plate of something.
These are just small hints of the way that wealth can distort somebody's reality. And then there are some cute trademarks of the movie. The house getting completely thrown askew every time Admiral Boom shoots off his cannon. The carnations in the buttonholes. The upside-down umbrellas. One night while tucking the children in, Mary tells them that their father is going to take them to work the next day. It's an idea that she planted in his head.
Pressed and dressed, Jane and Michael will be at your side.
Jane is wise enough to know that the idea of her father taking them to work wasn't one that he ever would have thought of on his own. She knew that Mary must have planted the idea in his head somehow.
Whatever did you manage it?
Manage what?
You must have put the idea in his head somehow.
Jane thinks that father will be able to point all the sights out to them as they walk, but Mary points out that sometimes a person can't see beyond the tip of their own nose, through no fault of their own. She also tells them that sometimes a little thing can be quite important. And she's referring to the bird woman who sits on the steps of St. Paul's Cathedral and asks people for money so that she can feed the birds. Tuppence, or 2 pence, for a bag, so that they can feed the birds themselves. Michael loves the idea of feeding the birds. I think Mary Poppins knew that he would. But Mr. Banks makes another case for Michael's tuppence and says that he knows exactly what he should do with his money, and he'll tell him when he gets to the bank. He wants him to invest. This group of old men, partners at the bank, proceed to sing to Michael about the importance of investing his money in the bank. The moment where Jane and Michael are in big trouble because they don't want to invest their money is a moment where Mr. Banks, their father, does not have their backs. He's worried more about how he looks to his bosses than in how his children might be feeling in that moment. Bert saves them, and in a very unexpected turn, makes them feel their father's pain. And he plants the seed that maybe he needs their help.
Father's not in trouble. We are.
Oh, sure about that, are you? Look at it this way. You've got your mother to look after you, and Mary Poppins, and Constable Jones, and me. Who looks after your father? Tell me that. When something terrible happens, what does he do? Fends for himself, he does. Who does he tell about it? No one. Don't blab his troubles at home. He just pushes on at his job, uncomplaining and alone and silent.
He's not very silent. Michael, be quiet. But do you think Father really needs our help?
Well, it's not my place to say. I only observe that a father can always do with a bit of help. Come on, I'll take you home.
He takes them home, and they end up having a wonderful, brilliant final adventure, their last with Mary Poppins on the rooftops of London. But before they go to the roof, Bert imparts a little bit of final wisdom to the children.
There's the whole world at your feet. And who gets to see it but the birds, the stars, and the chimney sweeps?
Reminding us that all the chimney sweeps of the world might be the ones who most fully understand the way that the world really works.
There's things off in shadow and off way in light.
The adventure ends and Mr. Banks is furious at what an embarrassment of a day this has been. And Bert finds a moment to very subtly suggest that maybe Mr. Banks has been no kind of father.
And when your little tykes are crying, you haven't time to dry their tears.
He reminds Mr. Banks about a song that Mary Poppins taught the children early on, and he suggests to Mr. Banks that maybe he too could use a spoonful of sugar to help with the bitter pill of likely losing his job. Jane and Michael, in a poignant moment of contrition, then come down the stairs to apologize to their father and to hand him their tuppence. And as they walk away, the song starts to play, Feed the Birds. This moment somehow has always reminded me of the moment in Willy Wonka in the Chocolate Factory when Charlie gives the everlasting gobstopper back to Mr. Wonka. As he walks back to the bank, the song plays, and you can see that he's doing a lot of reflection. He passes St. Paul's Cathedral, and he remembers the bird woman.
After all, you have been with us a good many years.
After all, you have been with us a good many years.
As was your father before you.
As was your father before you.
As he gets fired by the partners of the bank, we learn that his own father walked the same path that he did, career-wise, and we grow in compassion for Mr. Banks. With the pomp and circumstance of his firing, the umbrella being turned inside out, the carnation being snapped, his hat being ruined, he remembers the spoonful of sugar and the word that you say when you don't know what else to say.
Supercalifragilisticexpialidocious. Mary Poppins was right.
He tells Mr. Dawes that when all is said and done, there's no such thing as him.
Actually, do you know what there's no such thing as? It turns out, with due respect, when all is said and done, that there's no such thing as you.
Impertinent, sir!
He hands him the tuppence, and he skips home to go find what is real. In this moment, Mr. Banks realizes all that he's robbed his children of because he's placed so much importance on stature and position. And what is real is his family. He mends the kite, surprises the children, kisses his wife, and they dance out of the house as a family to fly the kite, mended with his own tuppence. All this happens while Mary Poppins slips out unnoticed. Her job is done, and the saints and apostles all look down on Mr. Banks, who has finally shown that he cares. Though her words are simple and few, listen, listen, she's calling to you, and you realize that in many ways, you are Mr. Banks. Maybe your spouse has to take up a cause or a hobby just to feel their worth. Maybe you ignore your neighbors and take people who matter for granted. Maybe you can't see past the end of your own nose and have lost your imagination in many ways. This is when you can figuratively knock on the door and ask the boys to play it, just as Walt Disney did when he lost his way.
All around the cathedral, the saints and apostles.
The song always reminds me of what's important, and that's giving.
Come along now, come along.
Jane.
The watch factory? What did he do? He stands about all day and makes faces.
In whatever ways you can. Pay close attention to the work of the Sherman Brothers. Their songwriting is unmatched, in my opinion, in many ways. More on that later. Thanks for watching, everybody. I'll see you next time on Amy Nolte Music.
Her
are simple and few. Listen, listen, she's calling to you. Feed the birds, tuppence a bag, tuppence, tuppence, tuppence a bag.